Hello, Anshu here. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic is really very interesting and it's very closer to my heart about consciousness itself. So, the main heading is, does the wave function actually exist? Now, I wish to share my understanding and my interpretation of this fabulous talk, of which I am putting the link in the description box. Personally, I have an inquisitive mind and I am a seeker of the higher truth. With this said, let me continue because there is going to be a lot of exciting, stimulating, triggering questions being asked in this talk. And let me see what are your comments on this. The first concept is consciousness cannot be computable. When so one of this gentlemen in the talk, he said, uh, his name is I guess Penrose. When I transform my inner feelings to outer symbols, these outer symbols are only very limited in describing what I actually feel inside. For instance, the love I feel for my child or any other being is beyond any measurement. It has a dynamic form and it has a depth of dimensions and perceptions. The argument he presented here is the quantum field of electron, he says, is conscious and self-aware and holistic. While we understand reality through our limited perceptions and feelings, which are limited. Our view is like narrow, one dimensional, so any representation of quantum information is limited and not holistic. So, physical and classical states after the wave collapse are the symbols of internal states. Any symbol representation is limited in our perception, in our understanding. It is the internal state has innumerable possibilities, while classical or physical state has one bit per quantum, and that bit can be measured and explained by quantum mechanics, by physics through equations. So, in short, what he's trying to say is the quantum field is conscious, is huge, has got unlimited probabilities, where any representation which we give after the wave collapse is very limited. Now, one of the gentlemen, Roger, he says the quantum mechanics does not explain consciousness because it is based on Schrodinger's equation. Now, what is Schrodinger's equation in simple forms? In simple terms, it explains essentially a wave equation. The Schrodinger equation describes the form of the probability waves or wave function that govern the motion of small particles, and it specifies how these waves are altered by external influences. So that explains. This equation, Schrodinger's equation, does not work on big particles. So the argument he presents, there has to be a theory, a much larger theory, which is not yet formulated, of which quantum mechanics is a part of. My understanding that he's trying to say is that in future, the scientist will come across a bigger theory uh, explaining the consciousness itself through mathematical equations. While Penrose says the collapse of waves is purely random and it's not computable. Like mathematics cannot derive the consciousness. It is non algorithmic. It means algorithms cannot see the consciousness. He says, first, we must try to explain the consciousness and free will through a physics. We must start with a postulate that free will and consciousness exists first, and because of that, quantum mechanics can be comprehended, understood, or explained. So he says the reverse. He says that we must start with a postulate, means an assumption that there exists consciousness and free will, and that free will and the consciousness uh, through which, through the consciousness, the quantum mechanics can be comprehended, understood, and explained. So he says the consciousness and the free will comes first, and it cannot be explained through mathematical equations. He says free will cannot exist without consciousness. Quantum physics describes the internal nature in space, while the classical physics describes the external nature in space and time. So basically, anything we want to manifest, it starts with a quantum creation with very small electrons, the small particles, and then when it manifests into matter, then the classical physics describes the external nature of a particular object in space and time. But what determines the collapse? It starts with a wave, anything. But what determines the collapse is that thing which is conscious, it is self aware, and it understands the reality holistically. And those particles, they understand the reality in holistic form at quantum level. While Roger, he says the collapse of wave function is not due to free will, but it is related to gravitation mass. He says any collapse can be faster if there is no resistance. Suppose if we drop an object from a multi-story building, then it can fall faster without any resistance, but the speed can get slower when the resistance is large. So any collapse is affected by external uh, environment and through resistance. So, and so observation also affects the collapse. Quantum reality example how electron spins and behaves is very different than the conscious reality. So now I personally found various arguments making sense and very, very interesting, but you derive your own judgment. Listening to this entire talk, which is quite thought provoking, really. Now, what do I think? Because I'm also a seeker. I personally feel that even the minutest particle is conscious and knows what it is doing. When I was studying biology or zoology, we used to study under the microscope a single celled amoeba. And even a single celled amoeba knows how to feed itself and also reproduce. And I feel the free will does not exist without consciousness. Through our intentions and desires, we create the reality. But when and how that reality will manifest is not under our control. Why? Because there is something in the quantum field itself which is conscious and knows far deeper reality than we do. And that reality is beyond our comprehension because we are not looking at any particular manifestation in space time in totality. We are only having a limited, narrow view, and that total reality is beyond our comprehension. So sometimes in my personal life, when I have got no answer or things are not happening my way, so I just surrender to that totality, to that one, or to, you can call it God or conscious divine intelligence that is moving all of us, all the particles in the universe. And then we do only limited what we can do, what role is given to us in the cosmic drama, but the total reality is highly conscious, very intelligent, all sustaining, and all encompassing, and without any division, it knows all. So now you decide after listening to the talk or my brief talk, do you think the mathematical equations, which I feel are themselves derived from the consciousness itself, will be able to compute consciousness itself? So, what do you think? Put your comments in the in below. And I see you in the second part of this discussion. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.